Most of us have, at some point, harbored a plan to flee from civilization toward the wild. In the aftermath of a broken law, after losing someone close, when a business collapses, or when a country is occupied by a dictator, most of us have thought of escaping to the wilderness. For who among us hasn't been wounded by the practices of capitalist life? The modern world has bound us together with invisible chains. Clocks, taxes, ID numbers, notifications, and an unending thirst for validation. That mechanical sound that wakes us every morning heralds not just a new day, but the massive machine we are forced to be a part of. Civilization promised us security, but in return, it took our most precious possession, our wild and untamed freedom. But somewhere in those misty mountains, where history and the state cannot reach, people left everything behind just to be themselves. For centuries, they fled from maps, borders, and records. This is Zomia, a geography that begins in the highlands of Southeast Asia and ends in every scheduled corner where man refuses to be domesticated. Now it is time to ask ourselves, were those who fled to those mountains the free ones, or are we the ones imprisoned in these concrete valleys? While studying this mountainous region, anthropologist James C. Scott realized an iconoclastic truth. The people living in Zomia were not primitive societies left behind by civilization.
Very hard. Our name's very hard for you. I know. Hun? No. Hun. Yes. Hun. Tuk. Hun. Tuk. Huin,
Ole,
Hulin,
ole,
Uli,
ole,
Uli,
o,
U,
le.
Li,
Yes.
Oli.
They were refugees deliberately fleeing the slavery and taxation brought by it. Scott explains that these people refused to settle down and resisted becoming legible and governable by central states. Many even refused to develop a written culture, seeking refuge in oral traditions so the state couldn't record them or write their names in tax ledgers. Writing was the memory of the state, speech was the freedom of the wild. We aren't talking about a political ideology here. This was an existential choice. Just like the jeering through the French anthropologist Pierre Clastres realized while studying the indigenous peoples of South America. In his work, Society Against the State, Clastres explicitly writes, the absence of the state is not a lack or an incompleteness.
Bunu koyayım, bir ses geldi şu taraftan, yemin ediyorum. O karanlık taraftan bir ses geldi. Ulan bir ses var şurada, yemin ediyorum bir ses var şurada. Sanki adım atıyor.
Primitive societies remained stateless not because they couldn't build a state, but because they foresaw the domination it would bring and rejected it. They weren't those who failed to establish a state. They were societies that deliberately excluded the state mechanism and stood against it. The state has no clock here. There is only the clock of the seasons, the sun, and the shadows. Ever since modern man divided time into minutes and seconds and converted it into money, he has forgotten how to live within time. Time has turned into an enemy we chase. Yet the wild restores to man that ancient rhythm he has forgotten. The German thinker Martin Heidegger, while describing how modern man consumes nature through technology and the desire for calculation, proposes the concept of Gelassenheit. That is releasement or serenity. letting things be as they are, simply existing within the world without forcing it, without trying to control it. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han speaks of exactly this in his book, The Scent of Time. In the modern world, time is fragmented and accelerated. Therefore, it has lots, its meaning, its scent. The wild, however, returns to man that unhurried, unplanned, purely flowing time of contemplation. The river flows on, and the river is trying to get nowhere. So, then, why are we here? Why do we seize every opportunity to flee concrete buildings on weekends and throw ourselves under the shade of a tree? Why can we breathe, even if just for a moment?
Hold my hand. Doors. Darling, kiss me.
In a park squeezed between skyscrapers. Because our soul recognizes this domestic cage in which our body is imprisoned.
Tayland Chiang Mai Üniversitesi Teknoloji Merkezi. Üniversite içerisi resmen ormanlık alan arkadaşlar.
And it harbors a secret rage against it. While consecrating civilization with all its comfort, we silence that wild, borderless dervish within us. Friedrich Nietzsche heavily critiques this process of domestication of the modern man. He says that by being tamed, man's great life energy, that creative wildness, is pruned away. Against this system that turns us into herd animals, the wild is a rebellion. In 1845, Henry David Thoreau lived alone for 2 years in a cabin he built with his own hands on the shores of Walden Pond in Massachusetts. His only concern was to taste the very marrow of life. In his immortal work, Walden, he writes, "I what it had to teach and not, when I came to die, discovered that I had not lived." And Thoreau summarizes the vitality of the wild for humanity with his striking sentence, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." For he knows that if man becomes completely domesticated, nothing of the human will remain. Let's be realistic. We cannot all physically leave everything behind and settle in the misty mountains of Laos. We cannot tear up tax certificates, bills, and ID cards. Modern life has caught us once. But the question is, can we build a Zomia in our minds? How do we protect that free spiritual space where the system cannot reach, which cannot be taxed, and where algorithms cannot label us? How do we protect the state's propaganda? How do we protect our brain, the state's propaganda? The thinker Hakim Bey offers us an exit in his concept of temporary autonomous zones. He says that in an era where the global system covers everything so completely, permanent revolutions might be impossible. However, we can create temporary autonomous zones that escape the system's radar, where it cannot track us. That 1 hour you turn off your phone. That moment you simply exist by a fire with friends. That corner of contemplation where your mind slips away from the rules of civilization and turns inward. That is your temporary Zomia.
Conversation. Siz çok tatlısınız siz ya. Siz really beautiful you are. Oh, both of you.